Do people do good for the sake of doing good? Do they do good because it is honorable and just? Because it is the right thing to do? Or do people do it because of the fame and benefits that it brings them? Because of the consequences that would befall upon them if they do bad or if they do the opposite of doing good? I ask you the question, if there were 10,000 pesos lying on the sidewalk and no one was around to tell you no, would you keep it for yourself? Or would you look for its owner and return it? If you were to cross the street and you saw that there was no traffic enforcer, would you jaywalk or would you cross the pedestrian lane? These are the questions our presentation seeks to answer through the lens of egoism and the arguments of Glaucon against Socrates on the subject of justice. I'm Francis Afier III, and alongside my groupmates Azeruth, Kirsten, Tubeza, Levi Miranda, Kobe Atasan, Izzy, Janelle, Gayeres, and Andrea Aperocho, we present to you R2, the Ring of Gyges. I yield the floor to Azeruth for the presentation outline and a brief discussion about who Plato is.
This is the outline for the entire presentation. It begins with background information about the author, Plato, and followed with a discussion on egoism, along with its subtopics, psychological and ethical egoism. Then we tackle the story of the Ring of Gyges, as well as its relation to the main topic, and finally it ends with a conclusion and the references used for the entire presentation. First and foremost, let me give you a background on Plato. Plato was born around 429 BCE and died 347 BCE. He is one of the most well-known, widely read, and studied ancient Greek philosophers in the world. He is widely regarded as one of the history's most influential philosophers. He founded the Academy, a school for scientific and mathematical investigation, and also established systematic beginning of Western science. His contributions span a wide range of philosophical disciplines, including ethics, cosmology, and metaphysics. Plato, though not a scientist in the modern sense, investigated the natural world and the philosophical implications it entailed. He was also a friend and student of Socrates and a teacher of Aristotle. Now I yield the floor to Francis.
Thank you very much, Azeruth. Now we will move on to the first section of discussion, egoism. We discuss the concept of egoism as well as its subcategories, which is psychological egoism and ethical egoism. Next slide, please. Egoism. Egoism is the belief that everyone acts only from the motive of self-interest. This means that inherently people are selfish, and that in every action that they take, they do so not for the sake of doing good, not because it's just, or because there is some sort of high moral reason of doing so, but simply because it is what benefits them. Let us go back to the hypothetical situations that were raised during the start of this presentation. If there were 10,000 pesos lying on the sidewalk and no one was around to tell you not to keep it for yourself, would you keep it for yourself or would you return it to its owner? Well, egoism would investigate or rather analyze this from the perspective of motives and would what each action's benefits would bring you. Say, for example, if you were to keep the 10,000 pesos for yourself, that's fine. Because from the view of egoism, you're doing it for your own self-interest because you get to keep the 10,000 pesos. That means more money for you and you can spend it on whatever you want, new clothes, new shoes, some delicious food, and etc. Now, what if you gave it back to the owner? Well, we would be examining your sense of, how do you say this, the benefits or rather your own self-interests. You're giving it back to the owner because it would benefit you, because it would build rapport with the person who owns the money. And beyond that, there's also the possibility that the person would give back some money to you. This means that it's not a matter of which action benefits you more, but it's more of people act from the perspective of their own self-interest, which means that whichever action said person would choose giving back the money to the person who owns it or keeping the money for himself or herself. Egoism understands that these actions are motivated by the person's self-interest. Um, to the second hypothetical situation that was raised, which was crossing the street, if you were to cross the street and you saw that there was no traffic enforcer, no law enforcement to arrest you, fine you, or tell you that what you were doing was wrong, the action, or rather, for your own self benefit and convenience, you'd of course choose to cross the street by jaywalking and not using the pedestrian lane because it's way too far from you. Why do so when there's no one to tell you no? That is what egoism is. It is the belief that everyone acts only from the motive of self interest, what benefits them. In other words, people are selfish. Now I yield the floor to Levi for psychological egoism.
Thank you, Francis. Psychological egoism is a view that all persons, without exception, seek their own self-interest. It means that our actions, behaviors, and decisions are all driven by self-interest. For example, you simply need to work within to understand what motivates you to accomplish certain things, or why your passion for a sport or subject is so deeply ingrained in you. A, psycho- a psychological egoist would claim that your interest motivates you to pursue happiness. Another example is that you want to advance your profession because you want to prove something to yourself or to others, or because it pays well and gives you the impression that your job will offer a comfortable and secure retirement. Now I yield the floor to Izzy.
Thank you, Levi. On the other hand, ethical egoism is the view that recognizes that perhaps not all persons seek their self interest, but they should do so. It is a philosophical concept premised on the ethical justification to do what is best for oneself. In general, ethical egoism argues that it is ethically correct to prioritize the individual self above others. According to this concept, determining what benefits the self will then determine ethical justifications. Let's put this in a real life example. Imagine this. You have to urgently buy clothes for your Japan trip tomorrow, and your credit card bill is due tonight, but you won't be able to pay the full amount until next month. So you will be charged interest and a late fee. You just saw someone, however, accidentally leave their wallet on a park bench with a lot of cash hanging out of it. You know you could rob him, pay your bill, certainly never got caught, and then buy clothes at a fancy boutique. If ethnical egoism is true, not only can you permissibly take the wallet and rob someone, you must. Not doing so would be wrong, since these crimes are in your self-interest. If you'd feel guilty doing this, egoists respond that you shouldn't, since you've done nothing wrong on the view of ethical egoism. Now, I yield the floor to Andrea.
The Ring of Gyges is a mythical story from Plato's book, The Republic. The story is told by Glaucon. He is the main speaker in the story. His view is egoistic. He argues that people tend to act in favor of their own self-interests. To argue his case, he proposes the story, The Ring of Gyges. The story starts with Gyges, a shepherd who happened across a magic ring that makes the wearer invisible. He uses the power for personal enrichment by seducing the queen, conspiring with the queen to slay the king, and becoming the ruler himself. With this, Glaucon concludes that even a moral man will eventually become immoral as long as he believes he cannot be punished for his actions. I now yield the floor to Kobe.
Thanks, Andrea. So, to explain what Glaucon said a little less complicated, imagine there were two of these miracle rings, with the just wearing one and the unjust the other. No man could possibly be thought to possess such a loyal commitment to justice, when this man could securely take whatever he wanted from the market, enter any house, and have an intimate relationship with anyone he pleased, kill or free anybody he pleased, and in every other way be like a god among men. So why would he keep his hands off what was not his own? So what did Glaucon meant by this? The just and the unjust would ultimately reach the same conclusion. Their respective courses of action would be identical, and this is undoubtedly a strong indicator that a person is just, not voluntarily or because he believes that justice benefits him personally, but rather because it is necessary. As anyone who believes that they can act unjustly anywhere must act unjustly there. Everyone believes that injustice is much more profitable to the individual than justice. Which leads us to the conclusion, if the law and any and all restraints and repercussions were removed, people would generally seek to do whatever they want. I now yield the floor to Azeruth.
Thank you, Kobe. Here we question who is happier. Glaucon asked if the most unjust man had a reputation for being the most just, and the most just man had a reputation for being the most unjust, who among the two would be happier? Next slide, please. Glaucon presented a scenario of an entirely just man and an entirely unjust man, and ponders on what they would do if they obtained their own magic rings. Essentially, they are given the freedom to do whatever they want without having consequences for their actions. In this situation, the unjust man commits unjust deeds and gets away with it. And because he is so good at it, at being unjust, he is deemed to be just when he is not. On the other hand, the just man does good for goodness in itself, but does not seem to be good in the eyes of others. For if he will be honored for being just, then we would again question if he's just for its benefits and glory rather than for justice itself. So the just man has nothing but justice alone. And this is the challenge that Glaucon raises, to prove that the just man lives a happier life than the unjust man. Thus, he implies that the unjust person with a reputation for justice lives a happier life than the just man who is scorned for having a reputation of injustice. Glaucon also noted that if someone were to gain this power to become invisible and yet never use it to engage in anything bad, such as thievery, others would see him as a most wretched idiot and yet praise him to each other's faces. What Glaucon suggests is that most people are like that. If individuals could get away with anything, they would behave differently than the way that they would usually do. That if they would be able to hold such a power, people would act on their deepest and innermost desires and impulses that they would not show to others. People practice justice unwillingly because they recognize and understand that they are not powerful enough to get away with being unjust. With that being said, going back to the question of who is happier, if people could, they would choose injustice as the better life. Now I yield the floor back to Francis.
Thank you very much, Azeruth. Now we arrive upon the conclusion. The reading highlights the propensity of man for injustice, should nothing restrain it, and it also indirectly implies the importance of the rule of law, as it was repeatedly emphasized that without it, people would simply do whatever they want without concern for what is just and unjust. So let's analyze these statements in the conclusion. First statement, the reading highlights the propensity of man for injustice should nothing restrain it. Let's connect this to the concept of egoism, upon which man only acts for the purpose of his own self-interests. So, self-interest and injustice. The reading highlights the propensity of man for injustice should nothing restrain him, because injustice, as Glaucon discusses, is more beneficial for man than justice. If we were to remove all the rules, laws, and regulations, the consequences, the benefits of being just, no one would be just. They'd commit injustice because, from their own selfish personal view, that is more beneficial to them. If you could simply take the food, the resources, the water, the for women, I'm not trying to objectify women, but from the perspective of the reading, of course, and everything else that another person owned, why wouldn't you? It's more beneficial for you. Why wouldn't you take it? There are no consequences, only benefits. There's the possibility of the person retaliating, but if you succeed, you can take all of their resources, and that could be your own. All of the benefits could be yours. And that is what this reading tries to highlight, that man will commit injustice because it is beneficial to him if, of course, nothing would restrain him. And what is it that restrains man? Laws, mutual covenants. Moving on to the second statement, it also indirectly implies the importance of the rule of law, as it was repeatedly emphasized that that without it, people would simply do whatever they want without concern for what is just and unjust. And again, that's why the rule of law is important, because people would just seek to do injustice because, again, on a personal level, individually to all of them, is more beneficial than abiding by the so-called rules and laws, to respect one another, to act in a just manner. And that is why Glaucon called the rule of law and mutual covenants as what we would say the lesser evil. It is not good, nor is it necessarily evil. It is the lesser evil. Why is this? Because from the view of egoists, to do something, or rather from the view of ethical egoism, to do something for your own self-interest is the correct thing to do. So to commit injustice for your benefit is in and of itself good because it's beneficial. And to receive injustice and not retaliate, or at the very least take back what was taken from you because of the just injustice committed upon you, that is evil. To summarize this, committing injustice for your benefit is good, but receiving injustice and not having the power to retaliate is not good. It's evil. And that is why the rule of law is called the lesser evil, because it is the compromise between people who commit injustice in order for their benefits and people who do not wish to commit injustice. And when injustice is committed upon them, they are unable to retaliate. That's why the rule of law is known as the lesser evil, because it prevents people who are from committing injustice while allowing the weaker people, the people who did not want to commit injustice, the chance of, in a sense, retaliation, because there are now consequences for committing unjust actions. Next slide, please. Man does not commit just actions for the sole sake of being just, but because of the benefits it warrants and the consequences of failing to do so. Let me provide an example. Though not necessarily a man, let's take a look at corporations. Man, or in this case, corporations do not commit just actions for the sole sake of being just. Let's say the just action is charity, a donation drive, raising awareness, or a sort of charity event that the corporation or company is doing. They're not doing it because it's ethically right, because it's the right thing to do, because it's honorable, because, they're not doing that certain good because it is good or for the sake of doing good, but because of the benefits it warrants. If a company does something good, which in this case is the charity event, then what does this imply? What are the benefits? It raises the reputation, and people are more likely to say, oh, that this company is a good company because they're returning the money that they're taking from people when they sell their products back to society, back to the most unfortunate portions of the communities of society. And because of that, more people would buy their products. That's essentially what this entire presentation is about. Man / the corporation is not doing the charity event because it is good, because of some sort of like high moral value, but because of the benefit of raising their reputation and, in a sense, increasing their revenues, because more people would be more likely to buy more products from them. And of course, because of the consequences of failing to do something good. The corporation's reputation may go down because they don't do any charity events. And if we were to look at it again from the perspective of the individual man, there are consequences to doing injustice. At least in the perspective of society where the rule of law is strong. Um, this is why people don't recklessly kill someone else just because they hate that person, just because they want that person to die. Because there's the rule of law, there are penalties that will be sanctioned upon them. Because if you kill someone, there's also the possibility of the death penalty being imposed upon you, which is ironic. You killed someone, and to that end, you were killed by the consequences of your own actions because of the existence of the rule of law. So that's what it is. Man doesn't do just things because it's honorable, because there's some sort of high moral reason, but because there are benefits to it. And if they don't do, and if they do bad, there are consequences to it, which is the rule of law. And that is what this entire presentation is about. It's about the selfishness of man and that all of their actions are motivated by their self-interests. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to the references section, please. Here are our 4 references. Two of the references were provided by Sir. The first being R2 in and of itself, and the second being the reference of R2, which is the full story, or rather the full book of Plato, the Republic, because the Ring of Gyges was just an excerpt taken from the Republic. And then we have, of course, Britannica, our source Britannica, for the start of the presentation, for additional information about who Plato is. And of course, we also have from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where we took some of our understandings, or rather understandings of different people, added it to our own, and presented to you all of this information. Next slide, please. And here are our group members, as you can see, looking pretty and fresh. Here's me on the first. Then we have Kobe, Levi, Andrea, Izzy, and Azeruth. We hope that you learned something from this presentation, and we look forward to answering your questions. Not now, of course, because this is pre-recorded, but tomorrow, on Monday, after our Pachacucha presentation, we hope you prepare some interesting questions for us to answer. We are more than ready to take them. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.